Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. I'm your host, Mike Calabrese, and I am joined by a very special guest in today's episode. He is known across the internet as the NFL draft expert. He's an obsessive ranker of players. He is deep in the weeds from FCS, G5, power programs, no stone left unturned. And he's also just a fervent collector, as you can see here on the YouTube channel, of college football mini helmets, something near and dear to my heart. From Fantasy Life, we'd like to welcome Thor Nystrom to the show. Thor, how you doing?
Breeze, it's awesome to be here with you today. And that helmet collection behind me, people don't know this. I have you to thank for it. I followed in your footsteps on this. I asked you all, you can corroborate this. I asked you all kinds of advice when I was starting to build my FBS helmet collection. I've now polished those off and we are moving on to the FCS.
Well, that's the question that I have for you right off the jump. Missouri State, Delaware, do you already have them in tow? Are they in transit? Where are you in terms of the expanding field of the FBS teams?
I haven't found those easily yet. We might have to go to the school bookstore. You'd think those ones would be a little bit easier, but I haven't found those ones yet. But we will acquire those, and they will be landed in advance of this coming season.
Now, this episode, we're going to lay it out for you. If you love college football, if you love the NFL draft, this is the perfect hybrid episode for you. We're going to go through with some of the best picks for the most recent draft in terms of team fits, in terms of late round selections, those gems that teams are hoping not only to be able to stock their two deep, but also to be able to help in terms of the financial commitment for those players. And then we're going to get into some college football look aheads for this fall in terms of sleeper players and teams. But let's start with the best fits in terms of draft selections outside of the known quantities there in the first round. This is really your bread and butter. These are players that you've agonized over. You've done the evaluating, really a 12-month-a-year process. So let's start with a quarterback that hopefully can be the new face of the franchise down there in New Orleans.
I'm interested to get your take on this one, Breeze, because after following Tyler Shuck's career, I have to say, and then doing the NFL draft stuff on the other side, was a bit surprised all the steam that he got, and then ending up going 40. A kid who flamed out 3 years at Oregon. They thought he was the next Justin Herbert. Turns out he wasn't. They benched him after 3 games that last season there. Then he goes to Texas Tech. You have the 3 straight years with injuries that wrecked those seasons. And then his seventh year in college, you go to one of the most advantageous quarterback situations you can for Jeff Brom, right? A super duper underrated quarterback whisperer. Tyler Shuck he's always had the physical ability, right? 6'5", 220. He had a 9.7 RAS. He can do the cool things with the different arm slots and stuff like that. My question with him has always been under pressure. And I think last year, the decision making under pressure in particular, eschewing his mechanics under pressure sometimes and doing the all arm stuff and trying to do that sidearm stuff. I last year you get inoculated from some of that stuff in Jeff Brom's system. Now that was a perfect match for Tyler Shuck, and his game played up, of course, and he was able to stay healthy the whole year, which facilitated him being the 40th overall pick this year. This is another good situation that he's stepping into. You have the young first year offensive minded head coach that obviously has identified you to build around initially. I I don't love Tyler Shuck, the prospect, as the 40th overall pick, but my take on this one, Breeze, is one way or another, you will be recouping the value from that pick because if you toss him out there initially, I think the Saints are going to stink next year, and I think that they're going to be at the top of the draft board. I think that's more the idea here, but I'm curious what you think about Tyler Shuck going to the next level.
Yeah, when you cherry pick his film, there's some incredible things that he's done. When you look at the fact that he stayed healthy last year, that's really where it comes down to for me. And it's so difficult, I would imagine, to project, people who have the injury bug, people who can't stay healthy. Are they fluky injuries? I think about, let's go back to the 90s. Randall Cunningham was a quarterback who couldn't stay healthy. It basically ran him out of the league. He comes back with Minnesota. And then all of a sudden, in terms of scheme, they don't have him outside the pocket as much. They have him pushing the ball downfield. He stays healthy for that entire season. One of the best non-Super Bowl teams of all time. Not to, bring up any scar tissue here as a Vikings fan, but I think that's what's interesting. It's like every single team in the NFL evaluates injury and projections in terms of future injuries differently, I'd imagine. Is that correct?
For sure, 100%. And I obviously, I didn't stay in a Quality Inn Express last night, not a doctor, but for me, Shuck, that the durability concerns there, I feel like, both the way that I projected him just in a vacuum, but also in addition with that being considered, I think that's a QB2 long term, and I think he will be a QB2 after his 1 year of starting and helping the Saints get to the top of the draft board for next process.
It's also interesting that the Saints end up taking this guy after having taken Drew Brees, a player who quote unquote couldn't stay healthy. He basically had opportunities to go to Miami. The entire college football universe would be different if Miami had cleared him and they had acquired him and he played for Saban. I don't think
Yeah.
Saban leaves for Alabama. The domino effects go on forever in a scenario like that. Just interesting that the Saints are taking a gamble on another quarterback with injury issues. All right, let's stick with another player on the offensive side of the ball that you think is a really good fit in Quinshon Judkins. This is a guy who left Ole Miss, obviously, for the bag at Ohio State, but he was a perfect complement to what Henderson was doing. Is he a player, do you think, that could be a bell cow back, or is he going to be a running back by committee contributor in the NFL?
We both know he's going to be a bell cow, Breeze. I mean, right? He stepped in year one at Ole Miss as a three-star recruit. As you know, there's that famous picture of Lane Kiffin sitting by himself on the metal stands, of the high school that Quinshon Judkins went to. Ends up bringing him in there, and he bypassed a whole bunch of higher ballyhoo type veteran running backs on that depth chart immediately to start there. It was the bell cow for 2 years, and then obviously Ohio State last year. Ohio State showed last year both the way to use Quinshon and also the way to use Travion Henderson. And I think both their NFL teams that subsequently selected those two guys took a page from that book. Obviously, Travion Henderson, you go and now you're with the Patriots. Ramondre Stevenson will be playing a de facto Quinshon Judkins role for the Patriots this year. And then the Browns, they did something that I advocated that most teams that could do during the draft process. The Browns are one of the few that actually did. We were in a historically deep running back class this year. 2017 is the only one that you can compare it to over the last 20 years. And I was advocating that teams use two bullets on the running back position this class and get two of those guys for peanuts, because you were seeing guys going, especially you get into day three, round and a half, even 2 round discount on where they would have gone the year before in that crappy running back class. But the Browns, you take Judkins at 36, turn around 126 and take Dylan Sampson, who is going to be your passing down back. But Quinshon Judkins going to get all the work he can handle in neutral game scripts, right? I mean, like, he's for fantasy owners next season, he's going to be the ultimate. I don't want to say streamer because he's going to get the touches, but there's going to be matchups where he can go off if the Browns have a shot to win that game. Obviously, if the game script starts to go away from them, this would be where situations where DFS owners would want to sniff around Dylan Sampson on the discount, because Dylan Sampson will again throwing the passing stuff, and you get that. But the Browns were able, for not a ton of draft equity, to cobble together what I think is going to be a very good long-term starting backfield there.
Just like a fantasy draft, this is a run on running backs at this point in your rankings. There's three in a row. We start with Judkins. We go to RJ Harvey out of UCF. How do you see him transitioning to the NFL? Obviously, a different offensive system than what he was playing with the Knights.
What a fit for RJ Harvey, and I mean, the fact that Sean Payton identified him was like the least surprising thing ever. I was bullish on Harvey all process. I was one of the highest in the media on him. I had him RB6, but closer to RB5. I had Judkins RB5. I had Harvey 75th overall on my board. He ends up going 60th. And like I said, I was higher on him than most, but Sean Payton clearly even more bullish than me. That system, as you know, Breeze, Sean Payton historically loves throwing to the running backs. We know that Bo Nix likes to do that as well. And there was this cavernous hole in your running back room for Denver prior to this. They telegraphed that they were going to take the running back. We all thought they were telegraphing Omari and Hampton in round one. I'd be curious to know if Jahdae Barron falling to Denver is what changed that, or if they were sort of throwing out the false signals there, because what they were actually doing was targeting Harvey in round two. But Harvey, I talked to him down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, and I was the thing I was the most curious about, because when I watched his film at UCF, my supposition was this kid is a better receiver than he was allowed to show, even though he was productive with that. Because of the way that they run that system, they did not send him out on as many routes as I think he should have been beyond the line of scrimmage, right? It was a lot of stuff of, all right, RJ, as a secondary, tertiary check down option, now you create. Right? Like, after you get the ball, whatever. But again, my supposition was that you can send him further down the field and he's going to do damage. Nobody could cover him in the one-on-ones in Mobile. You put him with the stiff-hipped outside linebacker or the slow-footed strong safety, he was destroying all of them, and he'd have 6, 7, 8 yards of separation within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. You see more of that in the NFL. I mean, now he's going to. We know the system that he's going into. Obviously, Sean Payton and Alvin Kamara, and you can go back, throughout time with Sean Payton with this. We are going to see RJ Harvey used in a more creative way. The thing I asked RJ, what aspect of you, I was teeing him up for this. What aspect of your game are you hoping to show evaluators here in Mobile at the Senior Bowl that you don't think you got to put as much on tape? And he was very nice, but he did indicate that maybe the quarterback play wasn't the best in the nicest possible way that he could say at UCF. And then also that system thing. And he thought he could have been used more dynamically. And I said, well, RJ, that being said, do you know that you're one of two backs in this class who each of the last 2 years had 1.25 yards per route run or more? And he kind of chuckled. He's like, no, I didn't know that. But again, limited usage, and he was still producing. And now you are stepping into a role where you are going to get all the usage you can handle there for RJ Harvey. So wheels up for him. He's going to be a star in the NFL.
From one running back slightly complaining about his quarterback play to another, Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, Doak Walker Award finalist. In any year without a super freak like Ashton Genty, he probably wins the award. How much do you think he has an impact or the potential to have an impact from day one as an NFL starter?
He definitely will, Caleb Johnson, and what a cool fit there. What a cool story. Him going to Pittsburgh. The Iowa Hawkeyes, they based their uniforms, the color structure around the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's a famous story about Hayden Fry, the former legendary Hawkeye coach, reaching out to the Steelers, and they gave permission. That's why you see the Hawkeye jerseys and the Steelers one. It is not a coincidence how similar they are. The Steelers ended up getting 3 Hawkeyes in this draft class overall. One of them was in UDFA, but they got Black, the big interior defensive lineman, in on day 3, and then Sebastian Castro. They got him, the nickel in UDFA. Sebastian Castro absolutely should have been drafted. But as far as Caleb Johnson, it's cool with him beyond the symmetry of that stuff going to Pittsburgh because he's a guy who studied Le'Veon Bell, and you can see that in his tape. Guys like Le'Veon Bell, guys like Arian Foster. We could sort of go down the list. Guys who fell down a little bit too far in their draft classes, and Arian Foster all the way out of it because of the way that he tested and the lack of long speed that he showed during his pre-draft process. You get them at a depressed price point, or in that case, for free. But they're guys where we know in particular systems that they will excel. Caleb Johnson ran a 4.57 during the pre-draft process. And then all of a sudden he went from being, all right, for sure that guy's going to be a round 2 pick to now, okay, now we like some of these other guys, and he ends up getting pushed down to round 3. But what I found fascinating on that 4.57 run, that nobody talked about this, his max speed on that run, the 4.57 run, Caleb Johnson got up to a 22 mile per hour max speed at the end of that run at 225 pounds. What I found so interesting about that, his max speed on the Iowa GPS with the chips is 22 miles an hour, which is utterly elite for a 225-pound back. And Breeze, as you know, last year, Caleb Johnson, one of the highest explosive run rates in the NCAA. So it's like, how do you jive that? Well, you jive it because Caleb Johnson had a 7th percentile 10-yard split on that run, right? You see this on his tape. It's a guy who needs a little bit of a runway to access that top speed. When he gets up there, though, he is an enormous problem in the open field. Obviously, a 225-pounder hurtling downfield at that speed is really, really difficult to impede. And a lot of those runs ended up in the end zone last year in Iowa City. What did Iowa do last year with their offensive philosophy outside of getting rid of the nepotism hire Brian Ferentz? It was bringing in Tim Lester. Tim Lester, the former Western Michigan coach, as you know, Breeze, and last couple of years he was an offensive assistant with the Green Bay Packers. He instituted the Green Bay Packers full zone running system where you had the inside zone, the mid zone, and the wide zone. And Caleb Johnson just utterly ate in that. When he is able to pick down the line, the vision, the feel, and then the ability to manipulate linebackers to pick their gaps before Caleb Johnson chooses his. That's why you saw a higher preponderance of open holes that Caleb Johnson ran through at Iowa, even though to the way that you set that up, Breeze, no semblance of a passing game last year for Iowa. So Caleb Johnson saw as many stacked boxes as anyone in the nation, and yet he was running through more open holes because of his vision and feel in that wide zone system. Now he's going to the place where Le'Veon Bell made that famous. Again, a guy that Caleb Johnson studied. I think people are going to start to evoke Caleb Johnson to Le'Veon Bell as soon as next year. I think it's going to be like some pointing Spider-Man gif going on with that, and I expect Caleb Johnson to excel at the next level.
All right, we got two wide receivers to close out your best fits here. The Raiders went into the Dallas-Fort Worth area to pluck out a receiver that played a lot bigger than his frame. Talk me through this one.
Jack Besh, a guy early in his career, Breeze, right? Like a guy that we were intrigued by when he was at LSU. And they had so many receivers on that LSU team, and Jack Besh was able to get on the field right away. Then he had some injuries and eventually goes about his way to TCU. I think the guy that I comp Jack Besh to is Eric Decker, a guy that I saw a lot. Obviously, Eric Decker went to school about a mile from where I'm coming to you guys right now. The ability to contort down the field to get the best of it, the late hands down the field to get the best of it. That's what Eric Decker's game always was to me. And you see so much of that with Jack Besh, that his ability to contort to the ball and adjust to the ball. And again, always getting the best of it, no matter, the throw that he's given. I really like his downfield skills with that. This is a big slot at the next level. That's what he's going to be. And why is this a perfect fit? Because when that card was submitted, the Raiders didn't have a real slot receiver on their roster, right? Like a guy that they could project to step in. Well, the minute that card was submitted, you got your starting slot next year for the Raiders. And this is not your Raiders offense of last year or the last, however many years where you can't watch it. Now we got Chip Kelly running this thing. You got Geno Smith behind center. You have the stud running back that the defenses have to account for. There will be some room for Jack Besh to work with, and him and Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers, obviously you have to pay all kinds of attention to him short and intermediate. Jack Besh, maybe you can start to do some things as sending him down the seam. But I think that's a really good fit, and it's a guy that Chip Kelly's going to know how to use.
Let's close this out with Kyle Williams out of Wazoo. They were left essentially on the island of misfit toys with Oregon State in the Pac-2. Not a lot of national exposure, but that offense was fun as hell with John Mateer running things with that offensive system, which has now been transplanted to Norman for the upcoming season. But talk me through why Kyle Williams is an instant impact kind of receiver.
Kyle Williams, and I'll do a public apology to Kyle Williams because I was a little bit lower on him coming into the process. And the reason how long have we seen Kyle Williams? Breeze. We've seen him for 5 years, right? It was the three at UNLV, started all of them, even though he got to the position of wide receiver late, and he was a late convert to the wide receiver position in high school, but started immediately at UNLV, got him for 3 years there. You mentioned the last year with Mateer. The year before that was with Cam Ward, of course, right? But last year with Mateer is where Williams really broke out, and it was almost like maybe too much familiarity there, too much I think earlier in his career, I just thought of him as like, oh, this guy's really solid, but there's physical limitations there. See, I wasn't thinking about him as much as a pro prospect, but the last 2 years starts to open some eyes. And then going back to the Senior Bowl, what was striking about Kyle Williams against the other receivers out there, it was the release package off the line. And that's where I really zeroed in on it. Kyle Williams had the best release package that we saw in Mobile. And when you're thinking about his projection to the next level, if you just looked at it from afar and you didn't sort of get down in the weeds on it, you would assume this guy has to play slot receiver at the next level because of the body composition and not an elite athlete. And some of the skills he has, the route running chops, stuff like that, it would seem to be a better fit inside. But you're not going to be able to get him off the line in the NFL. It's the reason that he can play on the boundary because of that release package. No, it's like hide the ball in the cup, with how fast his footwork is. You just don't know which way he's going. Now he's gone. So you're not going to be able to stop his momentum off the line. You're not going to be able to funnel him where you want to go or put yourself susceptible to whiffing. And now he's running free there. I love the route running as well. The way that I think about Kyle Williams' game is he gets off to a head start in every rep because of that release package. where the measurables come into play, it's along the route stem. That's typically where the corner will catch up to him. Kyle Williams pulls back ahead in the rep at the route break. Very efficient. His footwork is really good. He keeps the defender off the beat of his scent where he's going to do that route break and the direction of it. And then you just see the efficiency with it. It's a guy who's been, as it were, in the cockpit for 10,000 hours running these routes, Malcolm Gladwell, and he knows what he's doing out there. So he is going to create the throwing windows for you. And then the ball skills, his hands are just super duper reliable. I think that's a guy that Drake May is really going to enjoy working with, especially the travesty of a wide receiver room that it's been for Drake May up till this point. I bashed the Patriots right away last process for taking Jalen Polk. I called him fool's gold. I said the third round receiver from that same team was better than him. And if you didn't believe me, you could just go back and the usage at Washington. Kalen DeBoer, Ryan Grubb, when both Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk were on the field at the same time. Jalen McMillan was always the number 2 option. So I thought that the Patriots made a mistake with that one. This one, they didn't make a mistake. Kyle Williams will be a week 1 starter for the Patriots this coming season right away. And I think Drake May is going to enjoy working with him.
So that's a wrap on your best fits just for this fall. But there's some long-term projects, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, there's teams that either have a luxury to be able to work someone in as a backup and get them reps in training camp and then some spot work this year, and hopefully on the horizon, they're a starter in 2026 and beyond. Let's start with Jalen Milroe in this category. I mean, the book's basically out on him. He's a freaky athlete, you know, in terms of what he can do as a dual threat. He has that rare ability to throw the ball far downfield with accuracy to really, you know, push it downfield. And that's what a lot of NFL teams, they talk about. Those players do not grow on trees. There's very few opportunities to select someone who can be accurate at 35, 40 yards down the field. But we do know that he just struggles with consistency in that intermediate passing range. And I guess that's where my question pops up for Milroe. Do you think it's a mechanics thing? Do you think it's him looking at the defense and not being able to process fast enough? Or is it purely a decision-making element? And if it's a part of, you know, let's call it a half scoop of all three, is that fixable without just throwing him into the fire and trying to figure it out on the fly in the NFL?
Theoretically, yeah, theoretically it is. You have to give him the year, right? Like the Ravens did with Lamar, and maybe longer for Milroe. We'll have to see. And then also you have to build that offensive system around him. We don't need him to become awesome with the anticipatory timing throws. It needs to become for him a get by pitch, right? Like in base, the way I think about it is like you have guys in college that you know their ERA is like 0. I'm not a baseball guy, but like you know it's where it's like 1 or whatever, and it's because they can throw 102 miles an hour and they just blow everyone away. But then you go into the minor leagues, and the further that you go up there, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't just get people out by rearing back and firing. I need to at least have some sort of changeup. I need to have some sort of get me by breaking pitch. So professional hitters can't just sit back dead red in the batter's box on the heat, right? Because they're going to start parking balls on me. You have the same thing here, where Milroe just needs to do enough to force defense to at least consider defending the middle of the field, right? Because you already have the sort of paradox of defending him of one of the better downfield throwers that has come into the NFL the last 20 years. That's not hyperbole. He was an absolute assassin. He has that elastic sort of easy arm strength that Michael Vick did, and his deep balls are a thing of beauty. The placement of them, the dropping it into the bucket, he even shields it away from the defenders. Like I just love him downfield. And then you have a guy who's going to be one of the most dangerous scramblers in NFL history if he can get onto the field. Who was it? Andrew Berry, the Browns GM, was the week 2 before the draft, said Andrew Berry believes he's faster than Lamar Jackson, Jalen Milroe, and he's more powerful as well. That more evokes Jalen Hurts. Lamar obviously is twitchier, right? And he can make people miss a little bit more, but you have a really interesting skill set here. And I was fascinated by what Seattle did here. Their whole deal with the quarterbacks this offseason, you get a 3rd round pick out of trading Geno to the Raiders, that aforementioned trade. Then you bring in Sam Darnold on a contract that could ultimately be a discount, right? I mean, everyone in the public and in the media thought Sam Darnold was going to sign for more than that on the multi-year deal. His AAV wasn't even close to the franchise tag for the 1 year thing. You know, it was 30 and change or whatever for Sam. If Sam is anything close to what he was last year for the Vikings, well, great. You got your starting quarterback at a fairly cheap price against the market. If he's not, the way that that contract was set up is that you can get out of it fairly quickly. And so they drafted a developmental quarterback to take a look at, and they got just about the most intriguing one in this class with the physical tools. Can you teach him that? Can you get that offense around him and construct that? We'll find out. But yeah, I comped out Milroe to Happy Gilmore. That whole thing about the crushing the ball, but then struggles with the putting. Can we teach him the putting? But the last point, Breeze, the two things you have to address there. Milroe likes to see the receiver open before he throws, right? And that's sort of the antidote to the idea of anticipatory throwing, which is throwing at the route break before the guy's turned around, right? Or throwing them open, right? I mean, that's stuff that we don't see from Milroe. And the timing stuff, it gets thrown off. That's why DeBoer was, I was going to say pulling his hair out, but he doesn't have any more of that. But DeBoer was getting very frustrated with him because those timing concepts where DeBoer in the past, in Penix, he got really good with this under DeBoer of getting the ball out on time, like a watchmaker kind of a thing. And Milroe, he doesn't do that because he wants to see you open. And then the other thing is that easy elastic arm strength I was talking about, that slingshot thing, he does it on every throw including on screen passes and such, right? And that's something we got to get more nuance on that. His arm strength, it shines even when we're not deep, taking that sort of hole shots down the sidelines. That stuff is great. We have to get him some nuance. And DeBoer only got the year with him, and obviously got frustrated that Milroe goes to the league. What we saw in 2023 with Milroe under Tommy Rees, we need an offensive system that's more designed like that. Last year, the changes that Bama made, Milroe ran for about the same amount of yardage 2024, 2023. But last year under DeBoer, those yards came from design quarterback runs, whereas the year before, the bulk of Milroe's rushing yards came from scrambles. I believe that as an offensive play caller, you have to give Jalen Milroe the option on every passing concept of, if you don't like what you see, you can run. DeBoer did not leave that option on the table for him. He wanted the ball out on the passing concepts. I don't think that was a great fit. I think the Seahawks know what they're getting here, and they're giving themselves some developmental runway to work with and see if they can hit a grand slam with the round 3 pick.
This next player, a skill position player, this kind of brings up a question I have with many NFL prospects, which is if you are in a perfect offensive system with a great play caller, how much of your production can be traced back to that play caller? And in 2023, Andy Kotelnicki, he's a genius. He was constantly getting players in space, 17 total touchdowns for Devin Neal. So last fall was a prove it to me situation. The whole offense was kind of stuck in the mud in September. He still finished with 17 total touchdowns. I think this guy could be one of the steals of the draft, and you think he could be a long-term answer as a situational third down kind of back for the Saints, and then maybe in the future being a featured back.
I think he's going to get run as a starter someday for sure, Devin Neal. I think initially, yeah, you mix and match him with Kamara. Obviously, Kamara getting long in the tooth. I believe that Devin Neal will show enough where he will be considered the Saints starting running back of the future. We knew in this, again, going back to the historically stacked running back class, that there was going to be guys that got pushed down further than they should have. If Devin Neal had been in the previous class, the crappy running back class the year before, late third round pick, mid third round pick, absolute worst, top of the fourth, and you end up getting him in the sixth here just because of the amount of bodies that we had in the running back class. But yeah, I think he's underrated, Breeze, for some of those points that you're bringing up. Like it's a kid who stayed home, came from Lawrence, stayed with the Jayhawks, and Jayhawks, they were able to make some bowl games here in recent years. Obviously not the highest profile deal, but last year they had that weird season. You go from one of the best offensive coordinators in college football and Kotelnicki to, in my opinion, the worst. And I found it so funny when Wisconsin hired Grimes, when every single Jeff Grimes, that every single fan base has celebrated the departure of Jeff Grimes. And now Luke Fickell is counting on Jeff Grimes to be his savior at Wisconsin. Good luck with that. But Devin Neal was able to overcome that. He was able to overcome some quarterback injuries last year. He was able to overcome Kansas not playing any home games. Last year, there was construction on the stadium, so Kansas played some of their home games at Arrowhead, and then the other ones were at the the MLS soccer stadium this year. Obviously going back to Lawrence, but the Devin Neal's game, the thing that I love about it and the thing that's unique about it is for a 220 plus pound back, he's got the sweetest feet you'll ever see. And it's very subtle with his footwork, but he sort of paints this mirage for defenders because of the way that he moves and how clean his cuts are. And he'll string together like micro cuts. So he's like this sort of shimmering moving target for defenders coming downhill who rarely hit him flush. You will rarely see a guy hit Devin Neal flush, and he's bouncing off your arm angle attempts. And then this is another guy in Devin Neal where he will be a better receiver at the next level than he was at Kansas. This one skewed even more than RJ Harvey. Kansas had 3 senior starting receivers last year. They had a senior starting tight end as well. When they went to the air, it was throwing to those guys further down the field. Devin Neal was always used as a check down guy. We didn't get to see him as much beyond the line of scrimmage. He was another guy that was destroying people in the postseason All-Star game as a route runner beyond the line of scrimmage. You're going to see way more of that in the NFL. Seeing his feet beat people before the ball's been thrown in space. You ain't seen a linebacker, strong safety stay with Devin Neal in the NFL beyond the line of scrimmage. And same kind of a thing. And then he's a problem in space when he's got the ball. So I think Devin Neal was a steal in the draft.
A direct question for your next one. Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech, over 3,000 rushing yards in the past 2 seasons. Where do you come down on wear and tear? A ton of carries, a ton of focus, and the offense essentially running through him at times in Lubbock. Do you think that puts too much wear on his tires heading into his pro career?
I think the NFL ultimately was punitive with him because of that thing that you're saying. And also, I think they were sleeping a bit on his athleticism. I think people thought he was a bum athlete, like Kyle Monangai turned out to be a bum athlete. But Taj Brooks, he had some of the best agility scores that we saw, and he actually ran a faster 40 than we thought as well. I thought that might get him a little bit above where he ended up going, but he still fell into that range again. Another guy caught on the wrong end of the numbers game in this crazy deep running back class. But Taj Brooks, you see that agility all over his film. It's an all-time bowling ball frame, right? Built way down there, low to the ground, but dense, dense, dense. And then he's super shifty. So you get this dichotomy of this low to the ground runner, super shifty, who has tackle breaking power. I think between the tackles, he's going to have a lot of success in the NFL, short yardage, going to have a lot of success. And then he's also, and this aspect of his game was super underrated, I thought, under discussed during the draft process, a big value add on passing downs because he was one of this class's better pass blocking running backs. And he did it over a big sample of work, right? Where we had a lot of matadors in this class that didn't want to get involved with pass pro or they'd yank them off the field and they didn't have many reps with that. Taj Brooks, we saw a lot. He will be a value add. And I think a part of the reason he was brought in is for those pass blocking, to be essentially a bouncer for Joe Burrow, right? On third downs, third and longs, you're going to bring him in and he will take care of the first sign of danger there, Taj Brooks. He's also a reliable receiver. He's not as dynamic, but he doesn't drop the ball. And then you get the same thing of the shifty bowling ball. I just think of the bowling ball like on the slick lane, the guys that can do the spin. That's kind of how I think of with Taj Brooks, with the agility, with that power and built low to the ground.
All right, so far we've had baseball, we've had bowling. I'm hoping we can touch every single sport in terms of the
I'll get
competition.
parasailing in there eventually, Brace.
All right, let's speed run through some of the best late round selections before we start talking college football in the upcoming season. And let's start with the guy who spent the most agonizing time in the green room, and that was Shedeur Sanders. You can't talk to a college football or pro football fan without a polarizing answer to what they think his future is going to look like at the pro level. He lands in Cleveland, also in that strange quarterback room. Talk me through what you're seeing with Sanders, and if you have to separate out personality and what you see on film, or if you can kind of blend both together and hold both ideas in your head at the same time.
Yeah, well, you sort of have to, with this discussion, separate them out a bit because the reason that he went in the fifth round has nothing to do with his game on the field. And, like during that Mel Kiper stuff and him going nuts about all that, I think that it's easy for Shedeur Sanders fans to be like, oh, that doesn't matter. And the NFL is being overly punitive and yada, yada. And then it's too easy for people that don't like him to just be like, yeah, that's who he is. Right. I'm sort of in the middle with it, but it's when I'm able to separate those two, just the on-field profile, you just watch his film. He was one of the 2 best quarterbacks in this class, just on the field. Over the last 4 years, I'm not talking one. Last 2 years at Colorado, he played behind the Swiss cheese offensive lines on teams that didn't have any semblance of a running game. So opponents' defensive fronts were just able to tee off on him. And I know he took some bad sacks, right? And there's a narrative about the drifting in the pocket. That's probably the thing you're going to be working on him with. But I like his pocket mobility. I also like his toughness. That's a kid who took it on the chin quite a bit. It's a guy who will step into throws and take a big shot. But the elite parts of his game, it's accuracy and placement. It's a guy who is always leading his dude into space. He was always shielding the ball away from defenders. I think that those are elite traits. The NFL seemed intent to deliver the messaging to Shadir Sanders that if you don't come into the building and work, you're going to be out of here real quick. So I just that seems to be a fact from what we were told over draft weekend. But this situation here, and you get into the NFL, they were mentioning this. It's not a cliche. You get in there, it doesn't matter where you're picked. They're going to play the best player, particularly a coaching staff that's on the hottest seat in the NFL and an administration that might be on the hottest seat with regards to that in the NFL as well. If Shadir Sanders goes there, shows up to work, and is the best quarterback in camp this year, you're going to see Shadir Sanders early. They're not keeping him off the field on account of that. The stuff with his interviews and stuff like that, I heard some stuff about that as well. Some stuff even while the draft was going, that kept pushing him, filtering him down the board. Some that I can't mention the specifics of what I heard, but the best quote that I heard about it was I forgot if it was a coach or a scout, but said that Shadir Sanders treated his pre-draft process and the team visits as recruiting trips as opposed to job interviews, and that's. I think that's what it is. That encapsulates it about as well as anyone said it, in my opinion. Just sort of that attitude. It does seem like he got humbled, and so we're going to find out this summer. I've never seen a situation like this where there is so much importance on a player's behavior inside the building in the summer in his first training camp, as there will be with Shadir Sanders. So, but he knows what the situation is now. It's eyes wide open on this, and he found perfect situation. That quarterback room is cheeks.
All right, I'll get one question on the record for you. We can go back and play this clip in, 4 or 5 years. Over under 30 career starts for Shadir Sanders.
Easy over for me.
All right, there we go.
Yeah,
You're locking in there. All
locking
right,
in.
let's go from offense to defense. Joshua Farmer, talk me through what the Patriots are getting late in the draft.
This one surprised me with how far Joshua Farmer fell down the board. Look, he came from the travesty of the situation last year at Florida State, right? And not a lot of people acquitted themselves super duper well. But as far as the skill set of Joshua Farmer, the athleticism, the first step, his ability to crash the gates and pull pins out of grenades a beat after the snap, I couldn't believe that with that game and then the environment that we found ourselves in this particular NFL draft where the trench guys were getting pulled up, right? I mean, you saw the 3 offensive tackles taking top 9. You saw the first guard off the board at 12. That with the interior defensive line class, those top 4 consensus guys, Harmon being the last one, off the board by the Steelers pick. Guys were getting shoved up the board. There was very few where it went the other way. Farmer and Darius Alexander would be the 2 that I could point to on the interior defensive line. I think that the Patriots got a steal on this one with Farmer falling down there. I don't know why he fell through the cracks. Maybe it was just a situation coming from Florida State last year, but I think that kid can play, and I think they got a long-term contributor there.
Talk me through what Tennessee got. They go to the farm out at Stanford. They grab a wide receiver who, when you flip on the tape against Travis Hunter 2 years ago, may have got the best of the Heisman winner.
He sure did. Yeah. I mean, that's of course where we were all more or less introduced to Imanor, right? Breeze was when he was going nuts on Colorado in that overtime game, whatever. But you see over the course of time with him, the skill set where I thought it was offering something to the NFL more than the pick he ended up going with. They took him 136. I had Imanor 60th on my board, and the receiver class this year, it stunk. And so a receiver who has this kind of physical ability, I was again just surprised he fell to 136. Imanor, he was never in a situation. He's never been in a good football situation. He came from Canada, right? And then he came to the sport late. Then he's comes from Canada. Then he goes to Stanford, and their passing offense during his time there was horrible. At the NFL Combine, I asked Imanor about this in the nicest way that I was able to phrase the question of like, you come from Canada, and then the last couple of years of your college career at Stanford, not the best passing environment. Like your pre-draft process. Are you basically like excited to get out there and run at the NFL Combine, showed the NFL what you have from athletic standpoint and stuff like that. And he was laughing. He was like, he goes, people don't even realize that I was a track guy in Canada. It's a big guy, 6'2", 206, and he's a track star that people did not think he was going to test as well as he did, even though he's been doing this for a really long time. He ran the 4.44 38.5-inch vert at that size. There are things to work on. There's still some rawness there, right? I mean, again, but you can explain the rawness because of his situation. Got to still work on the release package. Got to do some stuff working on the routes. And I think his route tree is going to be sort of naturally pruned for him. This is a guy that profiles to me as a number two wide receiver, ideally, where you get some possession elements out of him, but you also get the cool downtown stuff. He's very competitive. He can get off the carpet, clearly has wheels at that big size. We just have to make sure that there's some rudimentary aspects of that footwork off the line. This is sort of your bizarro Kyle Williams, and it didn't manifest as much in college, but there's going to be some of those big long arm corners, the Stretch Armstrong types that love to give you the defibrillator into the chest. Need to see some more nuance from Iominora's footwork off the line, but if he takes care of that, he's got everything else he needs to be a long-term starter.
If you're a Saints fan, this has been the podcast for you. We're going to talk about another draft pick in the Big Easy, Quincy Riley coming out of Louisville. Do you think he can step in and be a nickel corner right away for the Saints?
I do. Yeah. Quincy Riley, he got slept on because a little bit older. I think he came out after the fifth year. But we saw him, we got to see him starting several years in the ACC. He is, I don't want to say Jair Alexander because I don't like the helmet scout, and he's also not as good as Jair Alexander, but coming out of Louisville, you can think of him as a discount version of that. Jair Alexander was nitpicked for the same thing at a higher profile, higher price point during his pre-draft process as Riley was here. I'm not going to put it past Riley either, by the way, to be a boundary corner in the NFL. There are the measurables, of course, there are the concern, but you have the feistiness with both of those guys. I love the way that they play guys off the line, super duper sticky. It's like those are guys where they're covering you off the bus kind of a thing. You just cannot get rid of him. Just love the way that he plays the game. His style of coverage. Love the footwork. He doesn't get fooled. It's difficult to bait him. So I think Quincy Riley is going to prove to be a steal at the NFL level, who was only available where he was because of the measurables, not the skill or not what we saw on the field.
The last one here on your list for late round gems, Damian Martinez. And just such an interesting guy in terms of his career path at Oregon State, someone who burst onto the scene. He clearly demonstrated just visually, you could watch him and you could think back to some greats from Oregon State like Steven Jackson. But then they just wouldn't give him the ball inside the five. So those touchdown numbers weren't there. He goes to Miami, and last year, Miami was so many mouths to feed offensively, and Cam Ward pops off. So obviously, he could have very easily in the past 2 years had 10 additional touchdowns. Do you think that played a part at all into the overall discussion on him from a production standpoint and why he slid so late in the draft?
I think that had a part to do with it. Yeah. I see it a little bit different. Breeze, like, as watching Oregon State earlier, it was a totally different system than the one that Damian found himself in last year with Miami. And with Oregon State, it was more the downhill stuff. There was more blockers for you for sure, but you also had more guys in the box, right? So we got to see him in more cramped quarters and the way that his game manifested there. And I like the way that it did. He has the power with the agility. He has really sweet feet as well. Can make people miss. It's another tough guy to get a straight on shot of. It's a guy who runs bigger than his size. It's funny. He was listed at I believe it was 241 at Oregon State, and then I think last year it was like 236 at 235. They listed him at Miami or whatever, and at the Senior Bowl, I was talking to Martinez, and I was like, "Did you drop that weight to go to Miami because you were playing in the more wide open system, and you were going to see the thinner boxes? You wanted to be a little bit more agile." Because I was like, I know you were at the 240 playing in more the pro style one." And he looks at me and he kind of smirks and he chuckles and he goes, "Dude, I've never played a game at 240 pounds or even 235 plus." And they were exaggerating his size, but you wouldn't have known it from the way he ran at Oregon State, right? And then last year at Miami, you mentioned it. They had so many mouths to feed, and it was aerial leaning even so, right? I mean, there early downs, a lot of the downs where other teams would be running the ball. There's a lot of quick hitting concepts, and then even with the runners, like you mentioned, you had sort of the hockey line with that. I think this guy is better than he was given credit for by the NFL. I think it was circumstances that pushed Damian Martinez down the board. It's not a, and the other thing that did was not a receiver. I wouldn't have him on the field for the receiving downs, but the passing downs. But as an early down grinder and the short yardage, I thought he was one of the better ones in this class. So I'm pretty bullish on Damian Martinez at the next level.
The last three we'll just go through quickly in terms of unknown commodities. Brashard Smith out of SMU, Jalen Royals out of Utah State, and then Torrey Horton from Colorado State. Horton dealing with injuries last year. Smith out of, SMU, you could argue that potentially he can make a position switch or be more useful in the passing game than necessarily as a traditional runner, at least what he put on tape, the projections for a guy like him coming out of college. And then Royals, another player who got hurt late in his college career, but when he was cooking, he was the only thing going for Utah State offensively, and he still found a way to be incredibly productive on a weekly basis. Of those three, who would you be least surprised to see make a jump and be a significant contributor offensively within the first 2 years in the NFL?
The Chiefs guys, I think they both found really good landing spots. Brashard Smith and Jalen Royals. Royals, you get to a situation where a whole bunch of those veteran receivers with the Chiefs left, so there's opportunity to not only be one of the valued sort of depth guys initially, but to even potentially push for playing time. He only fell through the cracks because he did in high school recruiting as well. Then he had to go to the military academy in Georgia for a year. He was in the shadow of Kirby Smart's empire there. They just totally missed him. And then he goes to Utah State, ends up breaking out the last 2 years, but then coming off injury. Another reason he ends up getting pushed down. Brashard Smith to me is fascinating. Brashard Smith was the Tyrone Tracy of this class. Tyrone Tracy starts a career at Iowa as the receiver. After he transferred to Purdue, he found his destiny at running back, and the NFL didn't have enough exposure to him with snaps there to draft him any higher. They should have. Same thing here with Brashard Smith. In his case, slot receiver at Miami, couldn't get on the field because of a guy named Xavier Restrepo, and then he ends up going to SMU. SMU is like, well, let's try this kid out at running back, and it turns out he was a really, really good one. Brashard Smith, one of the best receiving backs in this class, and he's another guy like at the Senior Bowl. It's so fun watching him beyond the line of scrimmage running the routes because again you're going up against these linebackers and then these strong safeties and none of them could stay with him. Like the angle routes weren't fair, they would bite up on it and then you just be running free down the field and stuff like that. You have to deal with a slot receiver coming out of the backfield with Brashard Smith. Remember how many years ago, it was 5-6 years ago, when the famous story of Pat Mahomes telling the GM with the Chiefs that he wanted Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round. This time, obviously, that didn't work out. This time around, you get Brashard Smith pushed down to you in the seventh round. They might have found what they thought that they were getting in the first round with Clyde Edwards-Helaire in Brashard Smith, a guy who I think is going to factor in immediately on passing downs.
As I mentioned at the top, we're now going to transition to talk about the coming college football season. And I like to frame the first question like this. The Ashton Genties of the world, they walked out that door. Travis Hunter's gone, a lot of the major award winners gone, but the college football world keeps spinning. Of the massive superstars that left the college game, which replacement are you most confident in this fall to have very little drop off or in a rare case or two surpass what the big man on campus did for that program last year?
Yeah, of course, Arch Manning would be the obvious answer for this, but so we won't talk about him. I think Julian Sayin, casual football fans out there, you might not be aware of Julian Sayin, the Ohio State quarterback, but he's going to be stepping in next year. He's going to get to throw to Jeremiah Smith and all the different toys with Ohio State. And Julian Sayin, coming out of high school, his recruiting class, like the Elite 11, he was the best thrower of the football there, drawing oohs and ahs. I remember getting a phone call from someone that was actually from our mutual friend Breeze. Eric Froton was at that Elite 11, and he called me right after, was just gushing about Julian Sayin. He's like, this kid is going to be absolutely amazing. He's putting the balls through the tires, he's doing whatever he wanted with the balls, whatever. So Julian Sayin is going to be a superstar starting next year. The other two that I wanted to mention, shout out, you have a two-step here in CJ Carr, who will now be taking over at Notre Dame for Riley Leonard, as opposed to the guy that we all thought would be Steve Peanut Butter and Angeli, who we saw in limited exposure last year, a couple of times when Riley Leonard got knocked out, including in a high-profile spot. Angeli, I thought that kid was good. I was sort of surprised that what ended up happening there. Angeli transfers to Syracuse, where he is going to take over for Kyle McCord. So now both Carr and Angeli get to take over for guys who were drafted into the NFL. Angeli, I think at Syracuse, you don't have to change much of what you were doing there with McCord. It's a similar kind of a guy, and it's a guy who I think will attack downfield for you. Syracuse, they're reconstituting their wide receiver room. They lost a whole bunch of guys there, but we'll see. And then of course Gadsden as well if you toss them into that. But they still have weapons there in their system. They like to attack down the field. I think Angeli will give you that. And then CJ Carr, who the coaching staff at Notre Dame obviously likes. Be curious to see what they end up getting out of him replacing Riley Leonard.
You bring up Syracuse. They were one of my favorite teams to play with in college football 25, the EA Sports video game release. I mean, the Franimal did an incredible job turning around that entire team in 1 year. And when you look at their playbook, lots of RPOs, forced the defense to play 53 yards across the field. You mentioned Gadsden in terms of being a mismatch. LaQuint Allen was also phenomenal in terms of being paired with that receiving core. You couldn't stack the box. There was weapons everywhere, which is kind of strange to think about a Syracuse team. If you had said that last year, that would have been wishful thinking, if not a pipe dream, to say that it was a pick your poison situation. And then defensively, they had some nice pieces. Fadil Diggs on the edge was a real terror for them. So in terms of tier three teams in the video game, they were my favorite to rock with. Who was your favorite team from this past year to play with?
The Kansas Jayhawks. I mean that's kind of homer, but they had three different offensive guys that were 90 plus in the ratings, like top 100 overall players in the game. In Daniels, Neal, and the Kobe Bryant. So you do stuff there with them. I like playing with all the teams, and of course, Breeze. We do the same thing where we take over the crappy team and build them up. But like the alma maters are always right there at the top. You just can't really get away from them. So that's I would say them.
One last question related to all the NFL draft work that you do. In terms of coaches that are not just talent evaluators, but they essentially put these kids through the process. They make them better than when they arrived on campus. Whether it's the Power Four or the G5, is there a coaching staff or two that you look at on an annual basis? They got their hands on a three-star kid, and he basically leaves as an NFL draft prospect, and it doesn't surprise you at all because of how good they are as a staff.
Well, Kirby Smart's the obvious one, but if we're talking building guys up, then I would go with Kirk Ferentz in Iowa, just famous for doing this with tackles and tight ends, 3 stars, and building and running back positions. I believe Caleb Johnson was a 3-star recruit. So they would be way up there as far as developing guys above their sort of recruiting import. Another staff, you go down to the G5. Now this one has been dissolved, but the one a couple years ago from South Alabama was really impressing me when they were run by Kane Womack. Their ability to identify guys under the radar and then build them up, both offense and defense. I was really impressed with that. So they were for a couple years, they were my favorite sort of G5 factory as far as sending diamonds to the NFL, polished diamonds.
Speaking of diamonds in the rough, my favorite segment for this conversation, who do you have as your Diego Pavia breakout star for 2025, either transferring up or perhaps just being a legend at the G5 level and elevating a team to double-digit wins?
This one for me is no doubter. Gio Lopez. I just mentioned South Alabama. Gio Lopez coming from South Alabama. Now he played for the Major Applewhite and the offense that they had there. One of the funnest ones. For me watching last year was South Alabama because it's basketball. They just played crazy fast break. And they could both run and pass. Gio Lopez is a super fun quarterback to watch. He is a pint-sized lefty who scrambles. He's got this swashbuckling style. Very, very fun quarterback to watch. We'll see with UNC's got some weird stuff going on off the field and that sort of stuff. But just on the field, once we get out there, Gio Lopez, people are going to enjoy watching that kid. That's a Power Four talent for sure. Wasn't a surprise to see UNC end up targeting him.
I'm going to go with Mark Gronowski. And for those who don't watch much FCS football, probably never heard of the kid. Let's start with this. He's a brainiac. He's transferring from South Dakota State to Iowa. He's already graduated with a mechanical engineering degree and he's finishing his master's in engineering. Ferentz basically said he's the smartest guy in the building from day one when he walked in. And when you comb through his accomplishments, the guy couldn't have done more at the FCS level. He won the Walter Payton Award, which is the FCS Heisman, two-time FCS national champion and FCS title game MVP. And he's a big boy, 6'3", 230 pounds. And now that he's recovered from off-season shoulder surgery, there's a little bit of concern. Obviously, he didn't play in the spring, but the recent reports out of Iowa City, he's 100%. He's going to be good to go to throw with teammates on June 1st. That is all I needed to hear because when he's on the field, his tape, oh boy. Let's start, you've mentioned this phrase a few times, sweet feet. He's a patient runner. He can run over DBs. And when he gets to the open field, when he's, has those long strides going, yes, he's a 4.7 40 guy. But when you look at it, he was running away from a lot of the top FCS defenses, the North Dakota States, the Montana schools, just to name a few. So I think he's a tremendous prospect for Iowa to elevate themselves, a team that fixed their offense from being a total tire fire to being mediocre by Power 4 standards last year. That was a big jump. That was without quarterback play. And now you have a situation where he can step in. He's a great intermediate passer, which essentially gives them an extra weapon in the red zone as well. When you look at his highlight reel for the Jacks, a lot of touchdown passes inside opponent's 20-yard line because he could layer passes. He was very accurate. I would say, in terms of a comp for a player that people are familiar with, what Haynes King was able to do at Georgia Tech last year, I think is a pretty close comparison because he always makes the right decision, both with the passing game and also when to pull it in the run game and the RPO game as well. So I think if they fully take advantage of Gronowski's skill set, I think this could be a team that gets elevated in the same way that Georgia Tech was last year. Remember, Georgia Tech upset a top 10 Miami team in November, took Georgia to 8 overtimes as well. This is a guy that could be the missing piece for the Hawkeyes. What do you think about that addition
I
to this conversation?
I love it. Yeah, I mean, Iowa, it's been a while with having quality quarterback play there. And yeah, you watch a little bit of film of that kid. Interesting. You mentioned how ballyhooed he is. I love that he came up for, his audition season here for the NFL. And I think Tim Lester is going to know how to use him, construct the offense around him. You're going to see a different style of Iowa offense this year where they have a little bit more of the passing element with it.
We're going to close this out with some sleeper teams or teams that you believe are going to overachieve this fall. So walk me through some of these picks and I'll give you my instant reaction.
Okay, so the first one, and I went deep sleeper. I'm not saying Illinois is a sleeper, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
like we're going down in there. The first one, Houston Cougars. Houston for last year, first year with Willie Fritz, and they were trying to figure stuff out. They were fumbling around, and Donovan Smith, not good. Quarterback position. They didn't have many running backs. I loved what Willie Fritz did in the transfer portal, and the guys. Houston's starting to spend some money, the Houston Cougars, and obviously going up to the Power Five in recent years. You end up getting Connor Weigman from Texas A&M. Connor Weigman has NFL tools all day long. A big strapping kid. He can move around. He has a big time arm. It's not all come together for him yet, obviously, and there was some frustration at Texas A&M. But you can certainly, if nothing else, build a system around Connor Weigman, and they have gotten him as well some weapons there. I'm looking over at Houston's projected depth chart right now. 9 starters are projected on the offensive side of the ball that came in the transfer portal, and all upgrades pretty much. Broussard, receiver Amari Thomas, the running back. I love. They brought in Mean Dean Connors. Mean Dean Connors from Rice is a tackle breaker. He's not. It's not Scattaboo, but like if there was going to be like a discount Scattaboo for this year. I think it's Mean Dean Connors. So I think Houston's got a shot to really jump up in year 2 with Willie Fritz.
Oh, I totally agree. Amari Thomas, someone, I clown on Trent Dilfer in the UAB program constantly, but that kid was an absolute dog, and I wasn't shocked that he walked out the door and got himself a bag in this offseason, so I'm happy for him. You mentioned all the turnover in terms of their offensive depth chart. They also bring in 2 new coordinators, one on each side of the ball. Slade Nagel, who coached with Willie Fritz at Tulane, that Tulane team that went and won the 2023 Cotton Bowl over Williams and that USC team. He was the assistant head coach in 2023, so Nagel has a lot of experience. I think he's an upgrade there. But Austin Armstrong is the guy that I think is the biggest missing piece because he's one of the most well-respected young defensive coordinators and minds in the game. I mean, Saban hired him to be a linebacker coach, and immediately he was sniped and ends up becoming the Florida defensive coordinator in the same hiring cycle, one of the youngest to do it. And situationally, he really knows how to elevate a defense. He took over a young Florida defense that was a mess on third downs, nearly dead last in the FBS. He got up to 35th in year one. And really, the reason why he's taking this Houston job is because he wants to be his own man. He doesn't want to be a co-defensive coordinator having to flip-flop who's calling plays. So I like that Houston pick a lot in a Big 12 that I think anything could happen. We saw it last year with basically a team that was picked to finish in the bottom three, winning it and winning the auto bid. I think if you're going to go for a team to surprise, the Big 12 is a good place to start.
For sure. So let's stay there with Utah. Utah, the down year last year. Obviously the injuries, and we've finally gotten off the Cam Rising carousel there, and I suppose the Brant Keithy one as well. But yeah, the Cam Rising thing really wrecked them the last couple of years. The durability concerns. You go and sign one of the funnest players to watch in college football in Devin Dampier, coming up from New Mexico, played Bronco Mendenhall last year. They're going to construct a system around him that works. Very unorthodox player, of course. He's a right-handed version of Geo, but even smaller. Just running, scrambling around, making plays with his legs, with his feet. A spacing problem for the defense. And the guy who can create right out of structure. So I think Utah, team that did not finish with a winning record last year, they're gonna be roaring back this year, I think.
Whittingham, the DC Scaly, who's now the head coach in waiting, and Devin Dampier, say less. I'm in. This was one of the easiest ones to rubber stamp because I think offensively they have nowhere to go but up. And it's not just Dampier. He also has Ryan Davis coming with him, who's a nice, solid possession receiver. But I'm most excited about the potential breakout for Creed Whittemore. He was a yak demon in, sparing use at Mississippi State, but they could immediately use him in the RPO jet sweep quick game. So I think this Utah team, if they make a jump and just get into the top 50 offensively, what they do on a yearly basis defensively, I think it immediately puts them into the top four in the Big 12. So I like that pick a lot.
For sure. Yeah. Next one I'm gonna go Virginia. Again, we're going off the beaten path here, but Virginia finally has a quarterback in Chandler Morris they brought in the portal. I like what Virginia did in the transfer portal this offseason. And again, now you have a legitimate passing game. You're going to be able to attack defense is different. And then the schedule for Virginia, very, very advantageous. Like I was starting to see what they were doing in the portal, and then it's like, okay, this is starting to get interesting. Then you take a look at their schedule. I'm gonna pull it up real quick.
Yeah,
Um,
the opening month, I remember I believe it's Coastal, William and Mary, rebuilding Stanford, rebuilding Florida State. So an opportunity to hit the ground running. I think they opened
yeah,
4-1 last year as well.
Yeah, and the only tough game in there is at NC State. We'll see what we get with NC State, but yeah, and later on another one of their non-cons is against Washington State, going to be down from recent years, and a Washington State team who is going to have to travel across the country for that game, of course. So Virginia is a team. If I was to put a stamp on a team to jump up, make a bowl game, hasn't made it in a while, it would be them in the Power Four. And Breeze, I want to go down into the coal mines for my deep sleeper now, the G5 version of this.
Hit me.
Now you tell me if I'm crazy. You tell me if I'm seeing things. I like Southern Miss. I like Southern Charles Huff.
Southern Miss, to borrow a phrase from myself, usually these G5 teams are organ donors to the rich. You saw it, even going back to the Bailey Zappi days, they take the entire Houston Baptist top guys, they move them over to Western Kentucky, the offense starts to work. They basically took all the best parts of Marshall, and this is a team that has had a dysfunctional offense for years in Hattiesburg, and all of a sudden overnight, they certainly have some pop right away. So talk me through more of what you're seeing with the Eagles.
Charles Huff is a really good coach. And, speaking of dysfunction, he has escaped a dysfunctional situation with Marshall. I don't know what was going on there. Marshall apparently did not want to rehire. They didn't even talk about the contracts. And then Huff, at his last season, is dead man walking. He ends up leading the team to the Sun Belt title. And so Southern Miss was able to just sort of pick him off here. The Southern Miss have been wandering in the desert here for multiple years, and the best coach in the conference just falls right into your lap. And you mentioned also his roster. You look over the R lads, the projected depth chart for Southern Miss. All the guys are in orange. Those are new transfer portal guys. So Southern Miss was going nuts. A whole bunch of guys brought down from Marshall, but now you have a really good coach as well. Charles Huff cut his teeth on Nick Saban's staffs most recently as an assistant prior to his time at Marshall, but a really good coach, and the talent level at Southern Miss has shot up. In addition, coaching quality, team quality, both have shot up. I think that team's going to be frisky in the Sun Belt this year, and haven't seen their win total just coming out of the NFL draft, sort of vortex, but I'll be hitting the over on whatever Southern Misses is.
Yeah, we're going to lean into the microphone and whisper here real quick. 40 to 1 to win the Sun Belt. 40 to 1 out there. So I don't know how
Let's
long
wet
that.
some beaks.
Yeah, that number is not going to hang around for long. There's some other people in the BBOC universe who are hot to trot on Southern Miss. So that is a team and a fan base, by the way. As soon as this team's good again, they're going to be all in. This is a program in a school that loves football. So it's not as though he's at a school where he needs to convince people. I still think of that the video that was going around with Sampson and the Houston Cougars from March Madness this year. They were going back to his first year at Houston, and he was at the dining halls trying to convince the students to go to a basketball game on a nightly basis. That's not going to be the case with Southern Miss if they come out hot. And also, I just love their quarterback play. Braylon Braxton, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
couldn't be a bigger upgrade. The kid was one of the best young starters in college football last year, and I understand that, you fly under the radar from a G5 perspective once you're drawing dead from that, college football playoff berth situation. But he should have been getting his flowers. So the fact of the matter is they're getting one of the top 10 G5 quarterbacks right away to rebuild this offense. All right,
Agreed.
that's it for us. Thank you for joining me today, Thor. This episode was incredibly fun. We could have gone for 2 or 3 hours discussing all this, but this is just the beginning of some college football talk here at the Big Bets on Campus podcast. We're going to have more CFB episodes in the coming weeks. We're going to introduce in Joshua Nunn as well to be able to walk through some of the projections he's seeing, win totals, and odds to win particular divisions in and conferences in the coming weeks. And also a reminder that I'm going to be back next week talking college baseball with Colin Wilson. We're going to be parachuting into the middle of conference tournament week to be able to give you some looks at the quarterfinals and beyond in the SEC and the other power conferences. That's it for us. Thanks, and thanks for listening, subscribing, giving us those 5-star reviews, everything you can do to help spread the gospel of BBOC, and we'll catch you next time.